think we're ready. All right. We're going to do probably a short one today. I am going to go ahead and do Lithophanes. Before I get too far in, though, I will say that Quiz 2, wherever it's at on here, there it is. Quiz 2, it was set to end yesterday, but it was set the wrong time of day, and so a lot of people missed it. So I reopened it, and now it doesn't end until tomorrow, I believe. Yeah, the 5th. And I did put it at midnight. Normally, all the other stuff I've put to be due at midnight on that whatever day. But for whatever reason, that one, Quiz 2, was originally set to end at 9 a.m. And so a lot of people missed it, thinking they'd do it after class or whatever. And so I did open that back up. So if you're one of the 15 who did not take it because of the time it ended, it's back open. But it's only open until August 5th, and it should be at midnight. All right, so what we're talking about today is the idea of a lithophane, where you've got a 3D print that has varying depths or varying thicknesses to it, and if you put a light behind it, then the light will be blocked at various amounts depending on how thick the print is at that point, and it will create an image. It already is an image. Let's see, I've got a couple here. I don't have any great ones. I tried to print some new ones, and we'll see what happened with those. But so without light shining behind them, they just kind of look, sort of prints. You can tell what they are, but and I don't know how well this is going to show up on the camera, but and it might blind everybody. I don't know. When you put a light behind it, then you get some imaging. And again, let's see if I can move that up, because it doesn't want to focus that close. So let's move up like that. Let's see. There we go. So you can get some sort of effect. And the effect, if you've seen one in person, the effect is much better than probably what you're seeing on the camera, just because I'm having to only expose a little bit of it at a time. These others, this is a PLA material. These are ABS. I had ABS loaded in the machine, and so I tried to print with ABS. This one's only partial. You can kind of see it cut off right here. We'll talk about that here. When you print these, the thing you might be interested in is, well, it would print a lot faster if I print it laying down flat like that. That's how this one was printed. This one was printed standing on its edge, and so was this one, although this one was as tall as this, so I don't know if you can even tell how tall they get. But you'll see what happened here on this one. Even though I printed it where the bed is moving it back and forth like this, it still would hang a little bit on the nozzle. So you probably need a little bit more retract on layer change, or check that. Maybe it's not even turned on in your slicer, so that when it goes to make a new layer, there's a little bit of retraction so it's not attached to the part. But you can see it had a definite change in position there, and it did kind of recover after it wobbled around a little bit. But at this point up here, it was just getting way too wobbly. It was clear it wasn't going to finish without popping off the bed. You do want to print with a brim, a pretty large brim, on even a regular print, because when you're standing on the edge anyway. I printed this one with a large brim too, because this one is ABS. But there's such little area to hold it down that you need a pretty large brim around there to kind of hold it down. If you print it on its edge this direction, if the green part is the bed moving back and forth, this is definitely going to have problems. So what they do have, though, is they don't have to be flat. They can be curved, and those different shapes, the non-planar shapes, would definitely help support this, just because it's not all in a single plane wanting to wobble around. We'll look at how to make them in a second. It's actually really simple. That's why I figured today will be a shorter one, because there's not an extreme amount of information to talk about lithophanes. But we've got this one, it didn't end very well, but and this material, the other thing you have to consider is the material itself needs to be somewhat translucent. A lot of times the ABS is not, but I wanted to try it in ABS just to see how far we could get. And this is also a dark color ABS, so it's already going to be subjected to wanting to warp. Now I am printing it in the printer that has the enclosure, so it didn't really warp. Where it was connected to the bed didn't really warp, but it did wobble a lot. So here's what you kind of can get through here. So you can kind of see, it has to be a very strong light to start to see, this is a dog, start to see any of the variations. But they are there. And if I had picked a more translucent color, you could probably have picked up better color variation. Well, not color. Actually, you can do color lithophanes, but you have to have a way to change out the filament. So either change, print one color, then switch the filament to another color or whatever, or have a palette or what's the other thing? The multi-material upgrade for Prusa, one that actually sends in multiple colors. But you can slice for multicolor lithophanes. I have not done one of those before. In person, this looks okay, other than the fact that about past here, so from here up, you can start to see, I don't know if you can see them, you can sort of see them up in this area. There are lines in the print. That's where it began to wobble a little bit, even as low as, a 3/4 of an inch or so. It started to wobble a little bit. And then up in here, it got to the point that it was very wobbly, and then I just had to end it up here. But it actually has a nice texture, not texture, but coloring to it, grayscaling to it. So this one is different. So this one's printed flat. And you do get, actually on the camera, it looks really good. In person, what it looks like is it looks a lot more like a paint by number, where there's very sharp edges between the different colors of gray. And it does give a cool effect printing it flat like that. This is a much thinner layer. I think I did this one at 0.14. I probably should have gone down even thinner than that, though, maybe 0.12 layer height. This is a 0.2 millimeter layer height, but it was standing on its edge. So you get more accurate results standing on its edge. There's more ability to create the relief. Here, you just get however many layers you can stack on top of one another. And so it gives a what I would call a paint by number effect. But it looks okay. Again, if this was a more translucent material, it would look a lot better. It's not as good as like this one. This one was on its edge. This is PLA. It did warp a tiny bit over here, even with the brim. And it is also made by a different lithophane maker. So let's look at some of the lithophane making software. Let's go over here. Now, if you type in Lithophane Online or anything like that, you will get many of these to choose from. I went with itslitho.com, but there are any number that you can choose. I was going to show you in the shape over here. The plane is the one that you saw. The flat plane or the one standing on its edge. You can change their size over here to make them smaller. It is better if you want a smaller one to make it smaller in this phase versus scaling it in the slicer. So if you scale it in the slicer, there's a good chance it will scale down to the point that it doesn't print. There's nothing there. So it's better to scale it over here than scale it in the slicer afterwards. Let's see, there's this one here's the arc. So what this one does is it creates an arc shape to it so that it's much less likely to wobble when it's moving around or when it's printing. Oh, this is the one that you use, the It's Litho. I think it's the best one of the ones that I've tried. I did try another one, and I can't remember the name of it, but it created very thick, like they were extremely thick. Now, I guess you can change the thickness on this one over here, but on the other one, you didn't have a choice. I can't remember the name of it, though. This one seems to be the one that has the most controllable sliders and, selections. The others I've seen didn't have this amount of control over all the details, and so you were kind of left with, you could upload your picture, and then you could select between an arc, a plane, a sphere, a couple of things, and that was about it. So I do like that this one lets you scale here. You can change the thickness in this area. I didn't change any of the settings. I just left them as the default, and it seems to be, of the ones I've seen anyway, the most powerful. You can actually, get a little preview of whatever you're going to have in there. You can actually set these to have a night light, and it creates a little fixture on the back where it will snap onto a night light that you would plug in, so that it's already ready to mount or whatever. I don't know if this particular one has, let's see. No, sometimes they do have like a box that you can create a box, but sometimes they already have one set up as a box, kind of that you put a tea light in or whatever. This one doesn't look like it has that set up already. The frame around the edge, that helps with giving it some amount of stability, because the lithophane itself is like, the thickness where there's no relief is very thin actually. So if without that frame, it would be a very wobbly print. So basically all you do, and it's even trying to get me over here, get my attention, it keeps blinking. See, you upload a picture. So I just went to my phone, took a picture of the dog, and I did do a couple of things. So you'll notice on mine, there's essentially no background at all. It's just the dog. That's not necessary, and this software doesn't do anything about that. But if you haven't ever run across it, and you don't already have something like Photoshop, this Photop.com is essentially online Photoshop. It has pretty much, well, I'm a not expert Photoshop user, so an expert Photoshop user probably has all kinds of things that this doesn't do that Photoshop does. But for just doing stuff on, some basic image editing, this thing is actually really good. And it does exist in the cloud. So your pictures probably are getting, somewhere in the cloud. So you don't want to do anything that you wouldn't want this picture to potentially show up somewhere else, because who knows. But I don't care if somebody sees the dog. Photop.com, I went to it, dropped the picture in, it's kind of off the screen, let's move it over a little bit. Did your selecting tool. There's several different versions of how to select, and it has the most recent types of selections that Photoshop has, where you can do object selection, quick selection type things. It's got your basic lasso and everything also. But I basically went around, selected him, and then inverted the selection to erase all the background. And then I did go into make it a black and white image. You don't have to do that part. You can keep it as color. I just wanted to go ahead and make it black and white, because then you can kind of control how much, what does it look like as far as the different depths of color. So what the Lithophane software is doing is it's trying to find dark areas, make those areas thicker in your print, find light areas, make those areas thinner, so that you get the relief or the different amounts of transparency, I guess not transparency, translucency, for the light to be blocked or allowed through your print. So I did kind of do some of that over here just to make it look a little sharper. I probably could have gone further with more of the contrast between what was light and dark over here. Then you can export it as a PNG and go over to your upload. It was probably still, yeah, I think it's right here. Oh, well, no, I erased it, I guess. So it looked like it was still in my, oh, that's a G code. Never mind. That's why I didn't see it. But you upload your image, you can just drag and drop or whatever. Let's see if I can find where I put it. I guess I erased the whole thing. Oh well. Oh no, I didn't. It's on the desktop. I see them. Let's see. I don't know which one it was. These are not the edited ones, so they're just gonna. There he is. So this will be one with all the background still in it. You can do some image editing in here, which works fine if you want to try and tweak the contrast between everything, so that you have more or less of what the print is going to look like. Maybe you can just bump up the contrast some to really make it stand out. Although with this, it's litho.com really seems the default settings are actually pretty good. Like, they seem to be accurate what you would want. But you can edit it over there. I just wanted to completely remove some of the background, so I put it in the in Photop. So there you get a little preview. You can turn the lamp on to get an idea of, although that doesn't look any different really. Oh no, that's the lamp, the one that actually puts a lamp behind it. Sorry. So you can kind of get an idea. You can see some of the, where it's going to be bumpy. Tweak it to the way you want, and then take it over to your slicer. A couple of things in your slicer. It is better if you print, let's see, this one doesn't show a bed, but I already talked about that. It's better if you print it so that if this green is the bed, and I have a bed slinger, so one where the bed moves back and forth, it is much better if you print it this way, because as I move back and forth, it still gets wobbly. That's because I'm not moving it straight, but that is much less than if you print it this way, and because it's gonna get very wobbly if you're moving the bed and print it this way. Obviously, you can print them laying down flat, but then you're going to lose a lot of the resolution on the relief, so that'll give that paint by number kind of effect. And if you print it this way, you really have to have thin layers, or else you'll get almost nothing. If you do a thicker layer laying it down flat, then there won't be enough distance in the relief to actually even print various layers. So you do have to drop your layer height. This way, smaller layers will give you better results, but even 0.2 millimeters is not bad on this direction, because the relief is then, your print head moving in and out to create the relief, and so you can get a lot more control over that. And then obviously the filament you choose makes a big difference on how translucent is the filament. I actually think PETG would probably be a really good filament for this, other than the fact that it can get stringy and a little bit lumpy. It's harder to get it to print these nice smooth surfaces. So I think PLA is probably the best material to create a lithophane with, other than the fact that you have to consider how you're going to light it, because PLA does have a much lower heat deflection than any of the other materials. And so if you're lighting it with something that it's going to put off a lot of heat, there's a chance that it will deform the PLA. So you do have to be careful of that. So that's why I was trying the ABS, but I don't have a good ABS material that is very translucent. The other problem with ABS is that it does tend to be a little more flexible. It's not as rigid, not as brittle as PLA, and so I was having a lot of trouble with it, wobbling around. You can print much slower. These when you stand these on their end, like the first time I just brought this in standing up like this, it was a 9-hour, 10-hour print estimate. And so that was not going to work for getting it done for today, because I didn't print it until yesterday. This one I printed a long time ago. I ended up trying, I don't even have that one. I did try to print it this way, which was a much more reasonable print, but it peeled up on me. So that was, and I just, at that point, I just went ahead and printed it flat just to get it done. So they're really cool. They do have over in the It's Litho, like probably if you go to the home over here, maybe that's where I found it. Let's see. Well, they walk you through some of their shapes, and you can create vases and things like that to print them on, lampshades, different fixtures that they already have that will attach to your print. A lot of these use the little electric tea light type things. There's the color ones. I need to try one of those. They look really cool. Upload the STL into Tinkercad. Oh, sure. So in Tinkercad, now the one thing with uploading into Tinkercad is that there is a limit, and it may not work. So let's actually try that, because Tinkercad does have I believe it's a vertice limit, and these things probably have a lot of vertices. So let's see if Tinkercad will start up, if I can get this one to upload. If it wouldn't load into Tinkercad, you could mix them together in Mesh Mixer. It doesn't have that limit. Mesh Mixer does have the problem of whenever you put high density models in there, sometimes it crashes. So you could do it that way. You just can't create, you can create geometry in Mesh Mixer, but it's not very friendly. You might be better off trying to upload to something like Fusion 360 or SolidWorks to actually get this to work. Right now, Tinkercad itself is not working. So there we go. Let's create a new design. And so over here, there's an import. Let's make sure we're on the screen. Yeah, there's an import, and you can choose a file. Let's see, where did it end up at? I don't actually know where it ended up. Did I erase it already? Well, let's just take that one that it was about to make for us, and let's just do that. So we were over here, we had this one. Let's go ahead and download this guy and see. Let's just get the Lithophane. The attributes are if you had attached the lamp stand or anything like that. All right, so now it's in, we have a STL over here. So let's see if we can import that. Oh, you know what? It says it supports STL. There's the file size is up to 25 megabytes. I don't think it was a 25 megabyte file though, so I think that's it. Just make sure that it has something on it. Yeah, there it is. All right, so let's see. Yeah, it was larger than 25 megabytes. So that's going to be the problem in Tinkercad, is that it does have a limit, and these things have so much data in them, trying to create all the little ins and outs and everything, that it may have problems ever getting one. Maybe if we make a smaller one, let's make it half the size and see if we're anywhere in the right range. Let's see. Oh, that's the fluid part. Yeah, that one was under. So you'd have to watch your file size over here. Well, you can't see it. Over here, you have to watch your file size. It's got to be under 25 megabytes. I don't actually know what units it was in millimeters. I remember now. So it does look like you can do it. I don't know how long it's going to take to do it, but let's see we'll come back to that in a second once it's done some work on it. Oh yeah, I was talking about the settings. So they have I couldn't find it. I think it might have been in the guides tab over here. So they talk a lot about just how, 3D printing in general. But then once they get to here, they even have kind of an internal argument on their own page about should you print with all walls or 100%, or well, they actually point out 99% infill. I did mine, they were so thin that I just did all walls. I didn't have any infill. And so, which is better? I think the walls are going to give you the better result with no infill, and just make it all walls. That might make it a longer print, but you would have more consistency for each layer. Every layer would just be concentric walls versus some of them having zigzags of infill. Even if it's solid, they would still be in a different direction. So I think the better lithophane is going to be all walls. So just add enough perimeters so that it all ends up being a wall. Do make sure that you print thin walls. If you're in Cura, there's an option to print thin walls, because if you don't enable that, some of these walls could be thin enough that they don't register as being sliced. That's also another problem. If you scale it in the slicer, they can scale down to even where they don't even count as thin walls, and you'll have gaps in your print. So definitely preview the print before printing it, because there's a chance that if you scaled it down too much, or if you don't have thin walls enabled, then it's going to have gaps where it doesn't even recognize it's thick enough to print. You do need to slow down. I did not. That's also why it was wobbly. They're saying 30 millimeters per second on these. Mainly that's to keep them from wobbling. You may have to retract on layer change if you're getting it, if your nozzle is sticking, it's oozing a little bit and sticking when it goes to change to the next layer. Then that could create a problem. Or you could turn on Z-hop after layer change, so that it pulls up and kind of lets the part settle down and then goes back to printing on it. You can print it at 0.2 millimeter layer if it's standing on its edge. If it's laying down flat, 0.2 millimeters is almost going to be useless. You won't get many variations at all. 0.12, I didn't go down to 0.12, I went down to 0.14. The thinner that you get, you do have to have your flow rate and everything well adjusted, or it's going to over extrude. So typically you don't notice a lot of that when you're printing at the 0.2 millimeters or higher. But once you start getting thinner and thinner layers, then you do have to have your printer pretty well dialed in, or it's going to over extrude. Definitely, I would recommend a brim, even if you're laying it down flat, just to keep the corners flat. But certainly, if you're standing it on its edge, which is the better way to print these things. These are just talking about the different shapes. Yeah, and this is standing up along the y-axis. All right. We never did get anything. Tinkercad just kind of quit on us here, so I don't know what. Got something's weird with it to begin with. Like it's got the stuff in the wrong. Let's go back to the beginning. See if it ever had anything in there. Yeah, I'm afraid that these would be tough to bring into Tinkercad just because of the file size. It's having a lot of trouble to parse through the dense file like that. You can certainly bring in STLs, but apparently this one just has so much geometry that it's really struggling to do it. I don't know if it ever will, in fact. And I don't know. Yeah, it can do an OBJ file. I wonder if you can download this as an OBJ. I don't know that you can. I think you can only... Yeah, I don't see anything that lets you choose the type of file format, and in here you just get to download it or not. So I think you can only export STLs here, and that it's having a hard time actually getting that to import into Tinkercad. So I think you'd probably have to, well, hey, it got something there. Let's go back to it. Maybe it just takes a while. So I think you just have to be really patient. Let's see what it looks like. It actually looks like it's all there. I don't know if, like, when I save it out of Tinkercad, if it's going to try to smooth anything or reduce anything, but it does look like you can do it. You just have to make sure that it is 25 megabytes or smaller, and then you just got to wait on it because it's going to take a while to process. Once it's done, though, it looks like it's all there. You can even kind of see where it's going to, you know, try to print in and out, and at that point, you should be able to add whatever you want to it without much trouble. Let's see how easy it groups things together. It does group them, but it, you know, seems like it works. It hadn't colored the tan part yet. At some point it probably will. So it does look like you can edit things in Tinkercad. This would also be a way, you know, something like adding this little guy would help it stick to the bed and not wobble as much. Or you could even, you know, I don't know, you could add some supports to the thing to try and mitigate some of the wobbliness during the print. I don't want it sticking through the thing. So yeah, you can definitely edit them in Tinkercad. It's just as long as the file size is 25 megabytes or smaller, and you're willing to wait for it to get processed. But remember, Tinkercad does run on the cloud, so it does depend a little bit on your internet connection. But it looks like it works. I'll have to try editing one and then printing the edited version and see how. See if it makes any changes. See, it takes a long time for it to finally recognize that I've joined all these parts together. So yeah, that's a good idea. A resin printer, I haven't seen many people print them in resin, but I will say that first of all, you get much better detail. A lot of the resins can be translucent or even clear, exactly clear, although you want some amount of pigment, right? Because it has to block the light. It can't just be totally clear. The way the bed works, it just raises up, so you wouldn't have any wobbling or anything. So I do think they would work really well. I'll have to print one on the resin printer here and see, you know, compare how it works compared to how the PLA works. The ABS I'm having trouble with, and that's partly the ABS material I have. I just don't have any really light colored translucent ABS. PLA is probably what I'll have to end up doing. So I think a resin printer will actually give better results. And the resin is typically not very sensitive to heat deflection. And so you wouldn't have to worry as much about the light source behind it deforming it in any way. So I think you can do some editing. You can scale this up afterwards, but I think scaling it outside of the maker itself is probably a bad idea, either up or down. It's probably going to give you some not as good results. So the one limitation to working in Tinkercad anyway is going to be that you can only make it as big as 25 megabytes. And there is a way you can reduce STL file size if you have the arc welder plug-in for Octoprint, or I think Anton maybe have mentioned that Cura had an arc welder plug-in. And so you could take it to one of those that has the plug-in for arc welder, and I don't know if it would pick. It would certainly pick up the arcs for the top and the bottom. There may not be very many other arcs in here for it to simplify, but a lot of times you can get on a typical model. This is not a typical model with all the little rough surface, but on a typical model you can get 20% file size reduction by running it through arc welder. I don't know if you get that much reduction on something like this because it's got so much jagginess to it, the surface, but that would be another way that you could get the file size down. I don't know another way to get it down. So you shrink the model and just have less G-code to begin with. Run it through arc welder, which will find some of lines of G-code and cram them together into one line of arc. Other than that, you might be tough to find another way to reduce the size of a STL file, because it's literally just points. It's all the points that the printer is going to go to as it moves around. So there's not a lot of compression you can do to that, unless you can change a whole string of points into a single arc. So all of that does look like it works. I do want to try the color Lithophane. I've seen some really nice looking color Lithophanes. I don't know, I never have tried one, so that would be an interesting tool to try and get to work out. Yeah, so you have to create the images in a way that are gonna be sort of paint by number ish. Looks really good though. If one of y'all ever tries the color Lithophane, then that can definitely count as one of the assignments. I don't remember. I think just a regular Lithophane counts as one of the assignments also. There's one in real life. Looks like it came out pretty good. All right. Like I said, I think today's a short one. Let's see, what other updates have I done? I did add that nozzle X to the Ender 3. There's no special thing there. It's just heat up the hot end, unscrew the old nozzle, screw the new one in, and that's all. Then heat tighten it down. That was no big deal. I did, when we were changing out the printer boards for the fan, I guess I don't have that little piece in here anymore. The fan was connected. This was the layer cooling fan. It was connected. Here it is. It's connected with this guy, right? Get back down to it. So it was just a push-on connector to the board. It kept coming. I had even glued it in. I even hot glued it down, but it kept coming just loose enough that the fan would not work. So I did end up cutting this guy off and putting one of the plugs that snap into the board in there. And so if you are plugging these kind of pins or wires into the board for anything, for a fan, thermistor, whatever it happens to be, particularly the thermistor, you definitely want to make sure it doesn't come out. They just don't have enough grippiness in that socket to actually stay down there. So either make sure that you get them glued in to where they won't come out. The fan's not a huge deal. It's just going to hurt a print if you are relying on it. The thermistor pulling out of there could be a huge problem. If your printer doesn't have Thermal Runaway enabled, I'm not even sure a way to check that without going into your firmware. Maybe you could check the firmware that they ship as a replacement. Like if your SD card that came with the printer, if it has the firmware on there, you would definitely want to make sure Thermal Runaway is initiated. It's active on your printer. Because if there's ever a reason why your thermistor fails, or maybe it's one of these plugs and it comes out enough that it's not measuring, what will happen is your printer is not detecting a change in temperature, and so it will keep continually trying to heat the thermistor, which at some point, if you're not detecting a temperature change but you're continually heating, at some point you'll reach the limit of the You'll reach a limit somewhere. Either it's going to be you'll melt the aluminum block, the heat block. You'll melt the thermistor. Well, not the thermistor, the heater. Something on your board will fail. You'll just put too much power into the trying to heat a block when you're not measuring the resultant heat, and something somewhere will fail. This is usually if there's ever like a fire-related failure to these printers, it's thermal runaway not being enabled. So definitely make sure. Wasn't even talking about that before, but it made me think about it. Definitely make sure that you have thermal runaway enabled in your firmware. I don't know a good way to check it other than you could pull the thermistor out, try to heat the heater, and what should happen is your printer would recognize, I don't know the exact message, but something along the way, printer halted or printing halted, thermal runaway detected. Something along those phrases should shut down your printer. Because what the thermal runaway protection does is it says, hey, I'm trying to heat this thing, but I'm not detecting a change in heat through the thermistor. So it's failed, or it's not plugged in, whatever. I'm sending power to the heater, but nothing's happening that I'm measuring. And if that's the case, then the thermal runaway protection should kick in and shut everything down. If your printer is just happy to keep trying to heat and heat and heat with no thermistor telling it it's actually gaining heat, then thermal runaway is not enabled and you do have a problem. So it would not hurt, assuming you're sitting right there watching everything, it would not hurt to open up your control box, unplug the thermistor. Usually it's the next to bottom or the bottom one. There's the nozzle thermistor and the bed thermistor, so you got to get the right one. I think it's the next to bottom one on an Ender 3, the one closest to you on the left-hand side. And just try to heat to a reasonable temperature, and then it should notice that it's trying to heat, but nothing's happening, and it shut it down. Halt it. If it doesn't halt it, then you'd probably need to, if you haven't already, well, I guess you haven't already, put firmware on there that has thermal runaway protection enabled. So go get the TH3D unified firmware, has it enabled. Enable it in your own firmware. If you want to keep using just the base Marlin, that's fine. That's what most of these printers are running. The fluid, I've had this a couple of times. Well, it's not connected right now, but the one that we put on Clipper fluid interface, the Clipper firmware, it has that enabled. I wouldn't install Clipper just for that. You'd have to want to have another reason to do that, but because thermal runaway is in Marlin, it's not a special thing. It's just for some reason some manufacturers don't enable it, and I don't really know why. I don't know if it's just a legacy firmware that they just keep installing the same thing over and over again and never have bothered to change it. But that is a thing that you want to check and make sure that your printer has it. So either put new firmware that you know has it enabled, or disconnect your thermistor and see if it shuts down when it can't heat. If it doesn't shut down within just a few seconds of trying to heat and not seeing a change in heat, then your thermal runaway is not working, and you run the risk of something happening to that thermistor. A wire gets nicked, the thermistor just goes bad, it comes unplugged from the board or whatever, and it doesn't detect that, and it just keeps heating and heating and heating. All right, that's your safety warning. I guess I'm going to start giving out more of those because we're getting close to the end, and so you're just going to be working with these printers, however much you want to, and there are some safety things that you need to be aware of, so that you don't end up as a on a forum somewhere showing a burnt down printer. So just that's the biggest thing on these printers is some of them ship with firmware that doesn't have that enabled, and you don't really know until because that's not a feature. They're not going to promote, hey, we we shipped this and didn't enable Thermal Runaway. That's not a feature to have, so definitely want to check that. Let's see what else. I don't know that I've done any other new things. I'll give a kind of update on the printing inside the enclosure. I have that SaneSmart enclosure. I actually like it. It's working really well. It also, not only does it contain the heat in there pretty well, this is ABS, completely flat with absolutely no warping at all. This is, deformed, but it's not because of the enclosure or anything. It's because I was printing too fast and it just got wobbly. But the enclosure works. I will say that it works better for me having something like Octoprint. This one's running Clipper, but something where I don't have to constantly go in the enclosure to put an SD card or whatever like that. So without that, it might be annoying, because as soon as you open up the thing, then you're going to lose a lot of the heat that you had saved in there. The heat only comes from the heated bed. So I guess you could drop some other heater in there, but I do like it, assuming you're running something that lets you remotely access the printer without having to open it up all the time. All right, I think that's probably enough for today. What I have listed is talking about some of the other slicers. Maybe I'll also have time to print a resin lithophane and see how that comes out for Friday also. Again, we've got a minimal amount of topics left here, so if you have one that you want to see, let me know. Oh, thanks. Thank you for I like the chats. I don't get very many chats, so I like hearing what y'all are thinking. All right. These are what I've got coming up. I've got Simplified 3D. It's not as big a deal as it used to be, because the free slicers are really good now, and they have a lot of the features that Simplified 3D used to be the only one that really did. And Simplified 3D has kind of fallen behind. They keep promising an updated version, but they haven't delivered it yet. Kind of, if you ask, you get an automated reply that it's coming, but I don't know. So I'll just go through some of the other slicers that are out there other than Cura. We've kind of done that a little bit. In the past, I've always done, the thermistor stuff. Just make sure you have Thermal Runaway protection enabled, because some of them don't come with it enabled. The thermal simulation of the hot end, that's in SolidWorks. It's an interesting thing to do and just to see how it does. It's not really 3D printed relating. It looks a lot more like CAD modeling, but it does relate to where all the heat goes in a hot end. And then I do have flexibles. I'd probably move the flexibles up above the thermal simulation, because we haven't really talked about that. And you can print, even on the Ender 3 with the Bowden tube remote drive, you can print flexible material, pretty soft flexibles too. Maybe not the softest of them, but you can get flexible to print on a Bowden tube. It's just a slower print. All right, I will see y'all on Friday. We'll talk about something, probably the Simplified 3D, and other slicers. And we're getting close to wrapping up. I did open quiz 2 if you missed that. Quiz 3 will open up soon. It's not a technical quiz. It's more of a survey type thing of like, how can we make the class even better next time? But it does count as a grade to do. And so that's quiz 3. It'll open up near the next week. It'll open up next week sometime. And if you have other ideas you want to just send about things that do work well or don't work well, the next time I teach this, it should be in person. So that actually is a little bit harder. It's actually easier to do this one online for me anyway, because I can have all the stuff around versus carrying it all to a classroom. But we'll see. See y'all Friday.